Today, we're going to unravel a legal and moral puzzle that comes straight from one of the darkest chapters in human history. This isn't just an old court case, it's a story that forces us to ask a really tough question. What is law, really?
Okay, let's get right into the facts. Picture this. It's 1944 in Nazi Germany. A woman reports her own husband for saying some nasty things about Hitler. As you can imagine, that doesn't go well. He's arrested and sentenced to death. But then, fast forward 5 years. The war is over, the Nazis are gone, and suddenly, the wife is the one on trial. The charge? Unlawfully depriving her husband of his freedom.
Now, the charge against her was incredibly serious, but she didn't deny what she did. No, her defense was something else entirely. It was simple, powerful, and it threw the entire new German legal system for a loop. What was her defense? I was just following the law. She pointed out that under a Nazi statute, it was illegal to criticize the government. So in her mind, she wasn't a criminal. She was a good, law-abiding citizen. And this, right here, is the heart of the whole problem. It's a question that stumped an entire country and sparked a massive debate between two of the greatest legal minds of the 20th century. Can you really be found guilty for doing something that was perfectly legal when you did it?
So after World War II, the German courts were facing this huge mess. They weren't just putting people on trial. In a very real way, they were putting the entire Nazi legal system on trial. I mean, what are you supposed to do with laws that were completely monstrous, but were, technically speaking, the law of the land?
This one grudge informer case, as it came to be known, became the battleground for a huge philosophical fight. A fight between two totally different ways of looking at the law. And it all played out in a famous debate between two thinkers, Hart and Lon Fuller. All right, first up, let's look at this through the eyes of the British philosopher Hart. He was a champion of a view called legal positivism, and he had a very clear, though you'll see a very difficult way of looking at this whole thing. So what is legal positivism? Well, the key word here is separate. For a positivist like Hart, you have to draw a bright line between law and morality. A law is valid if it was made by the right people in the right way. Whether that law is good or evil, just or unfair, that's a totally separate question. So yes, an evil law can still be a valid law. Hart looked at that Nazi statute and said, look, this law was morally hideous, no question. But it was passed by the government in power, it was the law, and he warned that if we start pretending something isn't a law just because we hate it, we're getting into dangerous territory. We're confusing the reality of what the law is with our feelings about what the law ought to be. So what's his solution? Hart called it a choice of two evils. Step 1, you have to be honest. Admit that under the valid law of 1944, the wife committed no crime. But since just letting her walk away feels morally wrong, the state has to do something drastic. Step 2, pass a new law, one that reaches back in time, a retroactive law, to make what she did in 1944 a crime. Hart knew this was legally messy, but for him, it was the more honest evil, because it's upfront about the moral choice being made. But not everyone was on board with Hart's tough choice. An American legal philosopher, Lon Fuller, came back with a powerful counter-argument. He basically said that Hart was missing something absolutely crucial about what law even means. Fuller's big idea was something he called the internal morality of law. He argued that for any system to even deserve the name legal system, it has to follow some basic rules of the game. Now, this isn't about whether the laws are good or evil. It's about whether the system itself has a structure that is coherent, functional, and fair. Fuller even laid out a kind of checklist, 8 principles. Things like laws have to be public, not secret. They have to be clear enough for people to understand. They can't punish you for something that was legal when you did it. And if a system just completely fails at these basic things, Fuller asks, can you really call it a system of law at all? And this was Fuller's core argument against the Nazi regime. It wasn't just a system that created evil laws. He said it had become so twisted, with secret decrees, punishments made up on the fly, and pure terror, that it completely failed his test. It had stopped being a legal system. It was just raw power wearing a disguise. Fuller himself put it perfectly. He said that when a so-called legal system doesn't even follow its own supposed rules, when the whole thing is just a sham, it's not that hard to say, you know what, that's not law. So here's the clash in a nutshell. You've got Hart saying law and morality are separate. The Nazi law was valid even though it was evil. The only honest way to get justice is to pass a new retroactive law. And then you have Fuller saying, no, law has an inner morality. The Nazi system broke down so badly it wasn't even law anymore.
so the wife wasn't following a valid law to begin with.
So we have these two brilliant competing arguments. But what actually happened? How did it all end? Well, what's so fascinating is that in this case, there isn't just one final verdict. There are three. First, the real-world outcome. The West German court found the wife guilty. And their reasoning, they said the Nazi law she was hiding behind was so evil, so contrary to the sound conscience and sense of justice of all human beings, that it was never a valid law in the first place. Now, let's look at Hart's verdict. He agreed she should be punished, but he hated the court's reasoning. He saw it as intellectually dishonest, just pretending an inconvenient law never existed. For Hart, the honest thing to do was to admit the law was real and then pass a new, retroactive law to get her. And finally, Fuller's take. He also agreed with the guilty verdict, but for a totally different reason. He said the court got the right answer because the entire Nazi system had ceased to be law. That meant her Nazi law defense was useless, and she was simply guilty under the last valid German criminal code that existed before the Nazis destroyed the system. So, three different verdicts, three totally different paths, all leading to the same conclusion of guilt. And this incredible case, and the debate it launched, leaves us with a question that's just as relevant today as it was in 1949. When the law of the land clashes with our deepest moral convictions, which one do we obey?